mosques are not just sacred spaces, but they're also spaces where people come together in the community. It's a place for Jummah, the place of gathering. And as most of you have probably experienced, it brings up all sorts of issues. I've certainly had experiences of being welcomed in some mosques and in other mosques feeling really troubled by my encounters with other Muslims. And I'm sure you've all had a variety of experiences, and sometimes in mosques going there and really connecting to the sacred and, finding it a really beautiful space. So today's talk is really about how can we make mosques more inclusive to include the diversity within our communities. In a lot of mosques, the management committees still aren't very representative of different groups. There's not many women, not many young people, not many people from other different groups. So this is a subject that I think really needs a lot of attention if we're thinking about how we develop as a community going into the future in Britain. We have a really interesting panel of speakers with us today. We have Mustafa Field, just here, Shakir Alim, and Halima Karwa. I'm going to introduce them one by one as they speak. So I'll start off with Mustafa, who's going to lead the presentation. And Mustafa Field, who has an MBE, I didn't know that, is a consultant for the Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, MINAB. MINAB provide advice and capacity building support to mosques and imams through activities such as institutional mentoring, training programs, development of toolkits, and facilitation of workshops, seminars, and conferences. Mustafa is also the director of London Faiths Forum, and he has a background in working with ex-offenders, reverts, congregations, and has a particular interest in working with young people at risk. So I'll hand over to Mustafa first.
Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Starting off, I think it's important to give some context to our mosques. And as many of you would know that most of our mosques in the UK were established between the 50s and the 80s by first generation migrants, many of them from the southern continent, South Asia. And many of them came as single men, working class men, to establish these centres to meet their needs as a place for spiritual worship. However, if we look today, our community is far more different and diverse. Today we have very diverse, and you can see today, just in the participation in this program, very diverse people from different ethnic backgrounds, gender, and in many ways professional backgrounds as well. This now we're at with a Muslim community of 5% of the British society today. Today, our congregations are wrestling for ideas and wrestling for an identity. They're seeking practical guidance, how they can implement their faith in life, in this society, which is a secular society, and sometimes they find it very difficult to reconcile their faith and their practice within the mainstream. And so many young people, many communities come to their mosque to seek that advice and guidance. And unfortunately, our mosques aren't able to cater for that. The Mosque and Imams National Advisory Board was initially established by various leading Muslim organizations, highlighting the need for better inclusivity in services and quality of services for the Muslim community. When we undergo our consultations, there was a huge area of lack of structure amongst the governance structure of the mosque. Many of the people who helped establish the mosque had very informal, close family relationships, friends coming together, making a real sacrifice to establish something that was really important to them. But they weren't able to meet the important governance arrangements that was needed for it. As the community developed, the more women needed to access the mosques, and often the mosques were initially started as one hall. So the woman would be sometimes, the change of the makeup was shown in the mosques, where the women would be pushed in the back rooms, or extensions would be made, but on a very low budget. And there was a real sort of struggle for this to take place in the community. And we've got to understand that, the resourcing of the changing, this change in the mosque, has had an impact on this as well. Just sort of moving now. I mean, as a second generation Muslim community, predominant, community as a second generation community, our expectation from the masjid is much higher. We expect to have, the mosque has to be a learning hub. Mosques weren't bought to be learning hubs. The purpose of the mosque, that was, the size, the demographics, the structures. Many of our mosques are purpose-built buildings. Sometimes bought on the cheap because they're purpose, and they're listed buildings. So the change on those mosques are very, very difficult to establish. We have so many other sort of like demands on the mosque around. We've lacked this, interest in looking at consulting the wider congregation of the mosque. This culture of consulting and listening, as a management committee. The people who lead our mosque are from, cultures that aren't familiar with engaging and working closely with their community and listening. There is a real challenge. We have to recognise that. But where my challenge is for many of the mosques and people who are, seeking to work with the mosque, is that the change can only come within. And it has to be the people from within those congregations that have to be pushing the change and making change. And there seems to be a real disengagement between the first and second generation in our congregations. It's like the second generation have given up on bringing change and working. And many of us come from professional sectors. In the education sector, colleges and schools and universities, to bring change in those organizations is such an expensive process. And we seem to expect, that needs a very pragmatic approach to bring that change. When we apply it to our masajid, we want an instant change. We want people, without developing education, without giving them support, without giving them the tools to bring change in the mosque, we as a second generation sometimes put demands that are very, very difficult. And, mashallah, our elders are the experts in, playing politics as well. They've been there for many years, and they to keep control. Which Muslim country gives power to their people? Where have they seen that you're more powerful when you can influence people than having a position as a chairman or a secretary of a mosque? This is not part of our culture, and unfortunately we've got to try and change that dynamic. But I also put a challenge to the community, is that we expect our imams to do so much for us, to educate our youth, to really look after the relationships in the Muslim community, to speak, be a face for the Muslim community. Sometimes we expect them to be able to speak in such an authentic way and a fluent way to make a change. But actually, when we look at our mosques, our imams are probably paid the most, the lowest wages, not even living wages. We expect, they are giving contracts, some of them almost like at a level of slavery. And so why I felt this background is really important is to contextualize our mosques. If we don't invest in them, we can't expect them to flourish. And so, when we have issues of poor arrangements for young people in mosques, and a real lack of inclusivity, some of the mosques, have no youth, structures to engage them, space for them, programs in English. The imam in English is cost a lot more than the imam from Urdu. So you've got, there is a bit of finance in it. You have to understand that these challenges come through resources, and we've got to play a very important role. As I see you as my, most of you as my peers, and that if we want our mosques to be more inclusive, we need to be playing a part. If we want mosques that have ramps for disabled people, or give the khutbah with the British Sign Language, who's going to pay for that? And that's a challenge. The congregations have to be giving. We can't be expecting to go to management committee members and constantly, what we need to do is have a contract with them. We'll help you raise this. You've got to provide this. Have an arrangement. Get them into an understanding of, we will give and you give, and we'll come to a better. Because no mosque, if you go to any mosque You know, I've visited 100 mosques in the last 5 years. I can say very few mosques would have said to me, if I was at, you know, we would like to establish a football club for the young boys in the mosque. None of them were objecting. But that has to be done by people in the grassroots. Don't expect the chairman of the mosque to set that up. There has to be people from the community to do that. In British society, it's the fathers of young men, young boys who set that up. Now I agree, I use the example of young boys intentionally, because if I said let's do a sports group for young girls, they would be a bit more nervous about that. But we've got to start a process of, you know, catering for the next generation. We have to start the process of investing in the provision for people who have are disadvantaged. How many madrasas, and you know, if we talk about, you know, our mosque, so many of them provide the educational, you know, our whole understanding of Islam at times comes, you know, the theological and from our parents and from the madrasa. How much time do we invest in developing our madrasas? How many teachers from our community, mashallah, we have so many educated people in our community, come in and give to raise the standards. You know, I know people, I know one or two people who work in schools here, and they complain about the head teachers in their schools because they don't like change. Our madrasas are the same. They need time. They need that. We need to, in some ways, nurture that change. And in the professional sector, many of you are like, you know, working in the city, etc. We see that there is all this culture of organizational change, behavior change. We need to use these skills to bring forth that change. You know, and this is all natural. I mean, you know, this Hindu community is having the same challenges. You know, if you look at, it's not just, you know, it's a Muslim problem. The faith sector in general, and I work across the faiths. You know, most of them are envious of the Muslims. How the hell do they get all these young people into their mosques? You know, they're empty. You come to them on any other day, you know, they find it very, very difficult. You know, and they've had to learn to adapt. Unfortunately, we are, we are heading, you know, for a crisis. And when I speak to mosque management committees, do we want to fall in the same trap as the churches in this country who become irrelevant to the young people? This is the trap that we're facing. It's only now that the churches are starting to look and see how they can be engaged with their congregations in a social level and provide their needs. For many of the churches, they're struggling, and they have a very older sort of congregation. So, do we have to wait to that stage? And that's where we've got to have that conversation with our mosque leaders. I want to put this to. I feel that the reason why I've thrown the emphasis a lot on the people here is that if we want to be the change and make our mosques change, then we've got to be volunteering to bring that change, and we've got to find ways and find professional ways. There's conflict resolution, negotiation, using potential partners. So like some of the mosques that we've worked with is that we've got them involved in interfaith work. That got the mosque to work with the young people better. We got them to work in social action projects like under the Citizens and various other institutions that bring civic duty. And it helps you, that external involvement helps you become, more they become more accommodating. Thank you for all your time, and hopefully we'll look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Mustafa. Okay, and our next speaker is Shapir Alim. And Shapir is a technologist by profession. I haven't heard of that term before.
Keeping it vague.
Okay. And he's worked with multinational information and technology companies for over 15 years. The reason he's on the panel today mainly is because he's a trustee at MCEC, which is the Palmer's Green Mosque in North London, which is a really good example of a mosque that's trying new things and is trying to make its space welcoming and inclusive to people. So the MCEC provides a place of worship, educational and social facilities for the Muslim community. It also aims to provide a range of culturally sensitive services for the wider communities of North London, with a view to improving quality and enhancing community cohesion. So it's an example of good practice, and it'll be interesting to hear from Shapir about how it's been the process of establishing that mosque.
Okay, thank you for that. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So it's quite an illustrious introduction to the mosque there. But I suppose, to give you a bit of background, in terms of Palmer's Green Mosque itself, it was first set up in a shed in the back garden of one of our trustees back in the mid-90s. So it kind of gives you an idea of how small the thing started. And then by the early 2000s, they came up with the opportunity to buy a bit of land, a couple of acres of land in North London, which is quite rare to find nowadays. It was an old sports ground which had become derelict and had all sorts of stuff going on there. The opportunity came up, and alhamdulillah, the community raised the money to buy the place, or buy the land. And then went on to going through all the rigmarole of planning permissions and all that sort of stuff, which involved a bit of give and take, should we say, with the council and other communities. So what ended up happening was half of the land was then sold back to the council for the benefit of the wider community, in fact. So what happened was that became a sports ground for 3 local primary schools, which it's still used as that today. And then some of the land was also sold to the local Hindu community as well, just to get us into a position where we could actually get permission to build a mosque. And I think at the time the trustees probably thought, oh my god, we're going through all these battles, but realistically, looking at it now, I think it's probably the best thing that could have happened, because we've got very good relationships with our Hindu neighbours, great relationships with the primary schools who come over regularly for school visits, etc. So as part of the RE. So that kind of gives you a bit of background to the centre as we are now. And unfortunately I didn't bring any pictures, which would be really nice to see, but if you do get a chance, do come and visit us, inshallah. But delving a little bit further, I think Mustafa, you alluded to management committees quite a bit, and I'm glad you didn't put all the blame on us. One thing I think we have to acknowledge is a very fine balancing act between the passion, the ideas, and the energy that the younger people in our community bring, together with the wealth of experience that the elders have. And we can't denigrate that. And what we've got to recognise is that we need to bring all that together. As Mustafa alluded to, it's a question of those who are not in the management committee, who are part of the community, they need to step up to the plate. And I think I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. I actually personally don't believe that a democratic model works when it comes to masjids. Too often I've grown up, I've been involved with Islamic institutions since I was high, and I've seen people who want a seat at the table. They want that label of masjid community member, and they lobby for power, so to speak, and they get to a point where people say, yeah, let's elect this guy in, and then effectively this is on their hands. They don't think about, well, what does the word trustee mean? You've been given a trust, you have to look after something for the next generation, which it certainly doesn't fall into people's minds, which is why it kind of leads me on to how we're still finding our feet at Palmer's Green Mosque when it comes to boards, committees and all that sort of thing. So my own personal appointment came from probably a channel that a lot of us would approve of. I came back from Hajj, alhamdulillah, and then I thought, give a bit of time to the masjid, and it ended up with 4 years of helping out with the Saturday school, which I have to say the Saturday school and the evening school and the madrasa at Palmer's Green is something I'm very proud of, because we dragged in the educationists in our communities. We were kicking and screaming. We appointed the head of RE at a local school, who happened to be Muslim. We appointed him as the head, and he started building up an Islamic curriculum which is beyond what you see in the books. It talks about relevant issues. So, for example, when they got to the madrasa's year 10, it was dealing with issues like homosexuality, creationism debates, and things like that, which frankly I don't think we see in other madrasas. And that personally is something I'm very proud of. And so the process where I became a board member was literally through that. So it's showing that commitment, and it wasn't my intention to become a board member. I was brought in as an advisor for well over a year, and that gave me the chance to see what the board was like. And it gave the board an idea for, the sort of person I was before they said, okay, do you know what, we'd like you to help take this centre forward. And let's be honest, I don't know how many Masjid committee members there are here, but meetings sometimes are extremely boring. We do get bogged down in the minutiae of light bulbs and security cameras and stuff like that. But then on occasion, and more often than not, alhamdulillah, we do look at the vision. We do look at 5 years' time, where are we going to be? What are we leaving for the next generation? And the other thing we also really, at the moment, quite recently, we've been thinking about our funding structure and the way we raise money. I think for masjids across the UK, there has to be a move away from the donations-based culture that we have. We've got to be moving away from that to, an asset-based portfolio that we can have that will give us a return, which means that we're not then relying on donors to, pay for staff, etc., etc. And that's something I don't think we really think about. When it comes to Palmer's Green, that went into the planning of the building. So they built a hall, which we hired out for weddings, whatever. Weddings, pretty much, weddings and weddings. I have to say, weddings are a very good source of income for the masjid as well. So. But we also look at other smaller charities. So we establish relationships with smaller charities in the community who don't have that meeting space. Alhamdulillah, we've got 10 classrooms upstairs, which most of the week they're lying empty. So these guys come in, they pay an hourly rate, and they use that space, which opens us up to not just the Muslim community, but the wider community. And that's important. It raises our profile within the wider community. So those initial people way back in the mid-90s who objected to the planning commission, frankly don't have any reason to now, because we have opened up in that way. Just carrying on a little bit about funding also is, Mustafa alluded to youth functions and things like that. Alhamdulillah, in the last year we've established what I like to call a child of the masjid. It's a little project called Green Stars, and what happened was we had a few brothers and sisters, young guys in their teens, came along and said, look, we want to run stuff for the youth. And we said, okay, fine, do it. And it was literally, go ahead, let's see what you can do. And we gave them the remit. We just said, let's see what you can do in a youth club for 8 to 16-year-olds for the next year. No formal structures, nothing like that. Let them run with it. We obviously gave them, you can't be running around the streets with the kids or whatever, and have them all do their CRB checks and so on. But alhamdulillah, that gave the committee a chance to see how committed these people were. And that then led to setting up, just in the last few months, an organisation we're calling Green Stars, which we're hoping to incubate and roll out as a model for other masjids as well, where they look after all of the youth activities. I'm not going to say sports are youth activities, but generally we have junior football, we have a cricket team which kicked off this summer, and alhamdulillah did really well. And girls' sports as well. When the girls' youth clubs are running and the boys are inside, the girls are out there practicing hockey. It's that sort of stuff. And yes, we have the benefit of having a lot of space around us, which helps. But setting up things like that also gives us an opportunity for funding, because we can look at other funding bodies, like for example, at the moment we're talking to Sported, who are a foundation set up by Deutsche Bank, who are looking for sports activities and communities who are running sports for the betterment of the community. And alhamdulillah, they've given us a mentor for setting up plans for running the youth club and all that sort of stuff, which is something we would never normally think about tapping into. I'm going to quickly run through, inclusivity and facilities and things like that, because that's always a big issue. It's not a question of the community lacking enthusiasm. It's about the community lacking enthusiasm for the masjids and the institutions. We need to look at the grassroots, and you can have your Eid fairs and your fun days and whatever. They're great, but what is it that actually draws people in? Is it the speakers? Is it the people who sit in the boardroom, or is it the facilities, or rather, maybe naively, I like to think it's the ethos of the establishment. I mean, what's the point of a masjid nowadays? We've got a prophetic example of where we even had prisoners of war in the masjid teaching, and these guys refer to non-Muslims, right, unbelievers, or disbelievers, I don't know what the correct term is nowadays, teaching Muslims how to read and write Arabic. Conceptually, I think nowadays that's way out of left field. That's not something any of us would really entertain proactively. At MCC, yes, we are a Sunni mosque, but we don't discriminate based on fiqh differences. We can't. As a board, we never do it. Our staff don't. But obviously, you can't stop individuals having their debates, and I think we encourage that as well. Have the debate, but have the etiquettes of difference in there as well. We get a lot of criticism as well for not so much now, but initially we did. We let our Shia brothers and sisters hold their majlis in the hall, have khatams. We have things like that, which, from our perspective, that's a community. That's nothing to do with what denomination they are. It's about what the community needs. We also face a lot of criticism for something, I think, which is quite rare, I think, in masjid nowadays, in terms of we don't allow established groups, to come in and have halakas and meetings in the masjid. Again, it establishes a precedent where you have the masjid becomes labelled with a particular group, whether it's the League Jamaat or whatever. It's labelled with it, and that's something we stepped away from. And it's quite harsh, I think, sometimes, but it does mean that favoritism doesn't become an issue. We're open to all of it. The prayer hall is a place for all members of the community, whether it's the long-bearded uncle who's never missed a prayer in their life, to the young mother who they'll be upstairs. We've got a creche with silent toys, and even a nursing room, which my wife tells me has got a very comfortable rocking chair in. But obviously, I wouldn't know about that. We don't have separate women's entrances. We have one big door. Sorry, we have two doors right next to each other, which open into one shared lobby. We'll have a tensor barrier, which means that don't go the wrong way and end up praying in the sisters' walls. That's just not right. And in fact, the interesting thing is we actually get criticism from more sisters than we do brothers when it comes to this. They seem to prefer having a physical barrier. And to me, that's quite surprising. Obviously, prayer areas are separate, so the sisters, they'll be upstairs on the mezzanine, they'll have the classrooms at the back, but then we haven't forgotten that disembodied voices in the ether are a waste of time. We've given them screens, we've got HD cameras which they can see the imams and speakers. It gives them that visual interaction, which is important, especially for the young mothers who are in the creche, because they've got the kids running around. They at least have something they can kind of focus on. And this is feedback from the sisters who are on our board. They've said, this is what we need to do, and it works. Let's talk about imams. I spoke about speakers and imams and so on. I mean, these guys are the pillars of our community, but as Mustafa alluded to, we certainly do not pay them enough. And it's not... It is partly the fault, I guess, of the seminaries and the sorts of things which are being taught in these establishments. But I don't want to get into beating up the Darul Ulooms of the world. And they do a job. They do a job well as can be expected. But what's important for us as a community is to understand that there's a secret issue in mosques at the moment where we have what are called threshold incomes and threshold salaries, which are paid to imams. And discreetly, imams are told, we'll pay you this much, and then the rest of it you can claim from the welfare state. And frankly, if you're saying these guys are the pillars of our community, we can go off and claim benefits as well, because we as a community can't be bothered to pay them enough. Right? And this is the sort of thing that does happen, and it's the sort of thing we battle with. When you get other institutions setting the bar so low, we struggle to find imams who are willing to take on a full-time role, who are, willing to be that pillar in the community. I mean, just to finish up, mosques, I believe, personally, they should be at the forefront of our communities. They should be the place where non-Muslims can come to understand Islam and not feel alienated in any way. And that largely comes down to our congregations. And it is pressure from the congregations which makes us change, but it does mean you've got to step up to the plate and help out as well. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Shakir. Our final speaker is from a relatively new initiative called the Inclusive Mosque Initiative, and that's Halima Karawat. Halima has worked for Muslim organisations of varying perspectives for over 10 years. She has a degree in philosophy and theology from King's College London and an MA in Middle Eastern Studies from SOAS, where her research focused on alternative interpretive methodologies of the Quran. Halima is on the Management Committee for the Inclusive Mosque Initiative, and IMI aims to create an inclusive, sacred space that welcomes all people and values gender expression and justice. It also facilitates inter-community and interfaith dialogue. So thanks, Halima.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. First and foremost, I begin in the name of God, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. Secondly, I'd like to thank the City Circle for inviting us. We're a relatively new organisation, so it's great to be given this platform. And I'd like to extend my salam to the two brothers on the panel with me, who obviously have been around for a little longer than we have, so I hope that we can work together and we can certainly learn from your experiences. And extend my salam to the audience. Assalamu alaikum. When we talk about mosques, we have, I think, a lot of grand ideas, and we get very negative about mosques, especially in the UK today. We say things like, our mosques should be community centres, they should have madrasas, they should have English-speaking imams, they should have, we talked about mosques of the olden days where mosques had schools and hospitals and these breakthrough community centres where people could come together and seek knowledge. I think sometimes we forget the main purpose of a masjid, and that's a place of prayer. A place where you go to connect to God, with a community, with a congregation, with like-minded individuals. And you're looking for a space that is clean and safe, and hopefully you've got a beautiful building that will remind you of God's majesty and God's awe. But let's not forget, you can pray. Allah's made the earth a place of prayer. And in Islam we are so very blessed that wherever we choose to pray, we require no intercession. We are always praying directly to Allah, regardless of the imam, regardless of the type of congregation we're praying in. Whether we're praying at home, in our gardens, or in the masjid. So God is present everywhere, and we can pray anywhere. However, even though when someone can stand before God and stands directly before Allah when they pray, I think we send certain messages to our community in the way that most of our mosques are organised. So we allow men to pray in the front lines, just behind the imams, and we have women right at the back. Maybe they're in the basement, maybe they're in the attic, and maybe they're not allowed in the mosque at all. And so even though God is present everywhere, and we can pray to God anywhere, often that's not the feeling that we find ourselves having when we pray in mosques today. There's a fantastic website called Side Entrance, and what they do is they ask participants, people from all over the world, to post pictures of their mosque experiences. So mosques that have fantastic spaces for women, mosques that have pathetic spaces for women, mosques that have, and everything in between. So I've got a few pictures just to show you. But I think when you look at these pictures, try and think of it, don't think of mosque as a community centre, think of it as a place where someone goes just to connect with God. And just think that's the only reason for a mosque. So this is It's just, I mean, these are all over the world. I think this one is from Canada. And there's some quotes. So she says, I have a 3-year-old daughter, and when she gets in trouble, I give her time out. I make her face the wall. So why, when I go to the masjid, am I being punished when I face the wall? This is a mosque in Tunisia, and this is the women's space where they can kind of see into the men's area. And they can see how wonderful and beautiful it is, but that's all they can see. So it's that majestic experience, but as a woman, we don't get to participate in that. It's just some examples. I'm not saying every mosque is like this. Any sisters' questions? Paper aeroplanes, scribbled questions inside, swooping down to the awaiting Imam below, and little kids will then run around picking up paper aeroplanes. Q&A at a mosque in Vancouver. This is an organisation called the Islamic Society of North America in the US, and the lady in the front is signing in, I suppose American Sign Language, it's probably the British Sign Language, and they're discussing sacred spaces. So there's some really good things going on as well. This is about mosque spaces in Indonesia, and it talks about how the entrances are the same for men and women, and sometimes there's curtain and sometimes there's not, but it's generally a positive experience. This is a ladies' entrance in a mosque in the US, so it looks rather scary. This is from Julie Siddiqui. She's the president of the Islamic Society of Britain. And she talks about how you can be so detached because you're in a room where there's like a dodgy mic system, you can't see the speaker. And she says, what prophet are people following? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam put steps at the front of the Prophet's mosque when women complained they couldn't see him. And he didn't blame them for talking or for not paying attention. This is in Canada. It's the Eid prayer where they hide out the sports stadium. It's just a fantastic picture. This is the sister talking about how the mosque entrance, because it's down the side entrance, it's really dimly lit, and she says that she's concerned about her safety in just going down the side entrance. And she says, why do I have to walk through a dark pathway to get to the side entrance, while the men enter through a well-lit doorway conveniently located at the front? This is just a space, it's a joint space, sorry, the photo isn't very clear, where men are at the front and women are at the back. This is a sister who came from Sweden, and then she's talking about her experiences in mosques in the UK, and how the congregations are generally quite shocked that she didn't want to visit mosques, and how they have to open up the women's section just to allow her to use it because it was sometimes locked. This is a mosque in Indonesia, I believe, so it's going to share space. This is really interesting. I actually stopped going to mosques for the reasons many women mention on your blog. The humiliation and degrading ways women are treated in the mosque. I usually pop into one when I'm shopping and I have to get a prayer done before it's time for the next one. Otherwise, I never go out of my way to go to one. This is a mosque with it's quite a beautiful screen, but it's a separate space. I remember when I reverted to Islam, I was very eager to go and pray at a mosque and meet more Muslims. However, every time I asked someone about going to the mosque, the first thing they would tell me was that as a woman I didn't have to go to the mosque and could just as well pray at home. It was discouraging and made me feel unwelcome. Just a picture of them. Very large cinema. Yesterday I went to a mosque with no separate area for children and mothers, just a big spacious room. And she talks about how the children were so much more content because they could go to their mothers and their fathers, and it wasn't children screaming in the masjid, it was parents sharing the responsibility. So not just women in the back in the crash. Sisters, please do not talk during. This is just about how it's really difficult for Muslim brothers to understand the experience of women, and that's why I put these up here to kind of give you an idea that if you're a man and you get to pray in generally what is the main space, it's just nice to try and see what it looks like from the outside. This is a mosque in Hebron, so the women's section is next to the mortuary. Again, it's about how women's areas are non-existent and very small. Side entrance. I like this one. This is about how a young girl normally goes to the mosque with her dad, and then she went with her mum, and she was fighting with her mum to say, why do I have to pray upstairs? I prefer go to the mosque with my father because I get to access the main space. Even a 5-year-old realised the men's experience was better than the women's. So mosque in Bosnia, really beautiful actually. Okay, I'll just leave that one up. Okay, so when we think of Allah, we think of God, and we think of how prayer is to connect us to God, these images, a lot of these images, don't match up to that reality, to God's justice, and how we use God to try and to connect to Him. The Inclusive Mosque Initiative are the number one purpose, and we have lots of other goals, but our number one purpose is about centering prayer, putting prayer back at the centre. So I'm sure you've all been to lectures, really inspiring lectures that you go to, and you hear some wonderful things about Allah, about the Quran, about the Sahaba, the Prophet, the Seerah, and then they say, oh, there's a prayer space at the back, or there's a prayer space behind you. But the centre of that interaction was maybe just about, it was learning, and obviously learning is great, but for us it's about, whenever we meet together, we start with prayer. It's the number one thing we do it first and foremost. And so it's about joining people together, and joining them and connecting them to Allah. And I was going to talk about the history of mosques in the UK, but you covered that already. So we all know they were made for men, and they were made for the needs of men at the time, which is absolutely fair enough. But our community has really grown and evolved, and our mosques haven't really been able to adapt. And if you look at our mosques, they're based on exclusive principles. So it could be geography, it could be the Pakistani mosque, it could be the Deobandi Pakistani mosque, could be the Deobandi Pakistani mosque that only the men go to, it could be the Deobandi Pakistani mosque that only the men go to if they're only above the age of 40. So our mosques are generally exclusive. But our communities aren't. Our communities have grown, like Mustafa said, and like Brother said, that our communities have grown and evolved. And we're sitting here at the City Circle, and it's testament to all of the Muslim professionals that are now around. We've got community leaders, doctors, nurses, city professionals, lawyers, politicians, and academics, and they're men and they're women, and our communities have grown and they've done really well. And even in our Muslim organisations, I quoted Julie Siddiqui, who comes from the Islamic Society of Britain. So even our Muslim organisations have kind of grown and they've developed, and they've been much quicker to change. And they've looked at issues of female access, they've looked at issues of female leadership. And yet our mosques, I think in a sense, our Muslim organisations have abandoned them, as you say. We expect so much of our committee members, and what sort of organisations have done is chosen to work outside of the mosque masjid because of the crippling nature of their sectarianism, the lack of transparency, the lack of female access and leadership. Mosques don't represent us anymore, and I don't think any of us would disagree. But their most basic function of providing a space of prayer, that really falls short. So if a mosque doesn't even doesn't even enhance your relationship with God when you go into that mosque, it hasn't just failed, that's a catastrophe. That's an absolute catastrophe. And some of the standards that the Inclusive Mosque Initiative want to hold our space to is that we say that we have a single entrance, that we think women have a right, disabled people have a right, whoever you are, you have a right to enter through a main door. You have a right to visual and auditory access to the main sanctuary. You have a right to pray without being separated by a barrier. You have a right to address all members of the congregation. That you have a right to hold leadership positions and memberships of the board of directors and management committees. And at the Inclusive Mosque, we actually state that we're going to have a majority of women on the management committee. For now, maybe in the future we won't need it, but for now we're going to have the majority of women on the management committee just to ensure that we cover and we ensure that we are fully representative. But it's not just about women. When we use the term inclusive, we're talking about disabled access, we're talking about British Sign Language, just as Mustafa mentioned. We're talking about all the different sects that exist in the Muslim world today: the Sufi, the Shia, the Hanafi, the Brilwi. Actually, a prominent mosque in London recently refused to bury someone because there were rumours that he was an Ahmadi. So we can't even provide burial services without sort of like whispers of maybe someone was the wrong type of Muslim. So the Inclusive Mosque Initiative is about providing that inclusive space for prayer, adding to the variety and diversity of mosque spaces. Providing a space that is ecologically friendly, that has access to all and is proactive about welcoming everyone. So, as I said, the mosque is most fundamentally about prayer and connecting to God. And for me personally, the only space I've really felt being able to totally connect to Allah is in the Imi prayer space, where I felt safe to talk about my being, to talk about my feelings, to talk about God's justice and the love and companionship that you can have with people that you pray with. So that's all.
All right, thanks, Halima.